If you dig around through enough automotive history, you'll occasionally run into situations where some really racy car stuff was used in arenas where it was never intended to appear in the first place. Maybe it's the use of high-performance cars to chase landing military planes, high-performance engines used to start some of those military planes, or maybe one-of-none cars built clandestinely for law enforcement or other agencies. Now, those are all interesting scenarios, but very rarely is an exceptionally limited-run factory race car the center of these stories. This one is the exception to that rule. Before we get to the car itself, which kind of became a truck, we need to know more about the application that it was modified to compete in, and it's something that many people know about, but many, many more have never heard of. Fireman drill competitions are not uncommon across the country. They've been going on for over 100 years, and they're a great way for local departments to get together and challenge each other in a multitude of different events. But in one specific place, they are conducted in an awesomely specific way in and unto themselves. That place is New York, a state with over 1,000 volunteer fire companies within its borders. Hey everybody, it's Brian Loans. Now I have my goals for 2025 and you have yours, and one of mine was to upgrade my earbud game. And I chose to do that with the Raycon Everyday Earbuds. Now this was a no-brainer for me. Up to 32 hours of battery life, the functionality to connect with more than one device at the same time, as well as active noise canceling, among many other features. The other thing they fit beyond my ears is my wallet. With all of those features and functions, they still come in at about half the price of other premium audio brands. Now I like these so much, I have a hookup for you. You can go to buyraycon.com/loans. That's buyraycon.com/my last name, LOHNES, for a 15% discount site-wide, not just on the everyday earbuds, but on the wide array of products that Raycon offers. Now Raycon Everyday Earbuds aren't just a perfect fit for me, they'll also be the same for you. Each set comes with a total of 5 different tips to match the best fit for everyone's ears, so there's no more aches after a long plane ride or after your commute to work, or in my favorite use scenario, after doing hours of research for the videos on my channel while listening to the music that I love. I also added a cool protective case cover, which in this color is absolutely impossible to misplace, but also supports wireless charging, which means that I don't need to take it off to actually wirelessly charge my earbuds. Now with just 10 minutes of charging, you'll get up to 90 minutes of use with the new quick charge function. You can go to buyraycon.com/loans to get 15% off all Raycon products site-wide and make your 2025 instantly feel and sound better. At the gym, on an airplane, in your shop, or taking phone calls, Raycon's Everyday Earbuds have the functions, the fit, and the price to make them a no-brainer for your next set of buds. If you don't love them, the company has a 30-day happiness guarantee, meaning you can return them with no questions asked if they don't meet your needs. Hit the link in the description below to go to the Raycon website and check out the entire array of products with a 15% discount for using my code just for supporting and watching this channel. I am sincerely thankful you do that, and I think you'll be thankful when you check out these Raycons. Now, back to the show. The way that New York fire drill teams compete is not only based on physical strength, agility, and acumen, it's based on horsepower, and lots of it. Imagine the idea of combining a drag race with a relatively dangerous obstacle, a stopwatch, and a fearless group of firefighters who know no other speed but hammer down. The sport carries a couple of different names, but Firematic Racing is perhaps the coolest. As New York drill team competitions evolved, the formats they were contested in had fire companies looking for any edge they could find to win and uphold the honor of their team and community. They adopted flashy names for the drill teams, and one of the first places they looked to get better at and quicker at was their trucks. Now, 2 of the major time competitions require a brace of firemen to be on the truck at the starting line. Said truck accelerates 475 feet to a line, where upon its arrival, the ladder is removed while men hold it. Another man then sprints up vertically 25 feet on top of the ladder. Now, a second competition uses the same concept, hurdling 475 feet at full throttle down the course, but this one is based on hose handling. The driver and 4 men leave the starting line, speed to a hydrant where 2 men jump off, affix a line to the hydrant. Meanwhile, the truck speeds to another spot, drops the other 2 guys off. Those 2 guys are in charge of attaching hoses and a nozzle and then shooting the water from the hydrant at a target. This may all sound like a bit of a yawner, but I promise you, it is insane. Now, back in the 1940s, they'd simply strip down a small ladder truck to save weight and have at it. maybe tweaking on the engine, but as time went by, hot rodding took over. Now, there are two classes in these styles of fireman drill competitions, B and C. B rigs are heavier, they race a shorter distance, and they carry an onboard water pump. Back in the 1960s, the rule stated that they need to weigh 6,000 pounds at minimum. Now, the C-class rigs had no minimum weight, and engine modifications were unlimited. The modern rules are kind of secret to this stuff, but I'm guessing that the minimum weight of a C-class rig may have been established around 2,200 pounds, but that's the best I can do is kind of guess at it after a lot of reading and research. I've been unable to lock down a number. The bottom line is that the B-class rigs are the heavyweights, and the C-class rigs are the hot rods. Literally. In the 1950s, fire companies began getting really into building full-on race rigs for these competitions, taking cars like Buicks and swapping blown motors into them, reworking their rear sections to allow firemen to be on the back with a ladder or a hose depending on the competition. By 1965, when our story takes root, teams were rolling in with Model A Roadster pickups, Studebakers, and other oddball rigs that were packing blown 392 Hemis, Chrysler wedge engines, FE Fords, and one team even had a 48 Mercury packing an injected Chrysler engine. Now, the guys at the Central Islip team knew that they needed to step up their program in 1965. While debating the merits of what to build and how to build it, the captain of the team, John Still, had a proposal. Rather than build a hot rod full of ragged edge parts and homespun engineering, why not buy a turnkey one from Dodge? Having been following Dodge's plans for the 1965 racing season, he knew that the company was set to release a factory drag racing car that would do everything they needed, have all the power they could want, was engineered to the nines, and with some creative customizing, would be the perfect C-Class rig. And that's exactly what they did. The Central Islip team bought an RO51 lightweight superstock Coronet with an A990 426 race Hemi under the hood from their local Dodge dealer, one of just 101 made in 1965. This car, which they would make a truck, was to be their secret weapon in competition. The cars cost about $4,600 in 1965, and 6 weeks after they paid their money, the dealership called for them to show up and pick up their Coronet. Presumably, the guys at the dealership didn't know where it was headed and what it was about to be used for. Before we get into how they modified this car, we need to go through what a 1965 RO51 A990 Coronet was and why it existed. This was a very specific car built to do a very specific thing, which, spoiler alert, typically had nothing to do with ladders and fire hoses. At the end of the 1964 NHRA season, the company announced that they would no longer allow aluminum or fiberglass parts on stock or superstock cars going forward. Now, this rule only applied to cars that we made in the future. If those cars had been made in the past and had met their minimum number of volumes sold, they would be able to stay. So effectively, those cars are grandfathered in, but going forward, things had to change. The Chrysler engineers smiled, nodded, and then set to work beating the rules makers at their own game. The company took 100 Dodge Coronets off the Dodge line and 100 Plymouth Belvederes off the other line and shipped them to the Lynch Road assembly plant, which also housed a modification center, and modified they were. The noses were replaced with one stamped from sheet metal 18 thousandths of an inch thick. It was steel, there was just very little of it. Not just the noses, but also the doors, radiator supports, hood, and stuff like bracketry was also made very, very lightweight. A lightweight Bostrom seat went behind the steering wheel. A special thin, lightweight glass was installed. The rear seat was basically replaced with a sheet of what can be described as cardboard. Stuff like hinges, handles, and other trim was made of aluminum. If it was not required to make the car go, it was deleted. No dome lights. Armrests are out of here. Sun visors are not needed where we're going. The heater controls, all of it got booted. Engineers decided that the two middle headlights had to go, and they were replaced by a modified Coronet grille to cover up the opening area. Big-time weight was saved in the engine compartment as well. Those massive iron Hemi heads, those are now aluminum. The intake manifold was now magnesium. Per NHRA rules, the car had to have a full exhaust system present. It didn't need to run through the mufflers on the drag strip, but the stuff had to be there. The way Chrysler engineers interpreted this rule was wild. They built a set of incredible headers and these headers could be uncorked very easily. But they also connected to a single exhaust pipe that ran down the right side of the car's undercarriage. This then ran back to a large transverse muffler that was set behind the axle. These two things were done to bias more weight to the right side of the car to help plant that tire, and that muffler hanging in the back to help weight transfer and to help the traction of both rear tires upon launch. Now the battery is mounted in the trunk, and that also helped to set the right rear tire when the gas was punched. With all this stuff done, you had yourself a lightweight Coronet. Now the factory engineers did too good a job. They came in 500 pounds lighter than the last year's lightweight cars and 250 pounds under the minimum 3,400 pound weight for a car in NHRA Superstock with a 426 engine. With a 100-pound metal shield mounted under the gas tank, remember weight distribution here, and a robustly constructed roll bar along with bumpers that were marginally thinner than stock, the cars made their 3,400-pound minimum weight. On the suspension side of things, engineers knew that snugging the rear axle forward some would help the car immensely with traction and weight transfer. Now, there were about a dozen truly altered wheelbase cars sold of this style, but on the RO51 Dodges and WO51 Plymouths, the trick was mounting the newly engineered Superstock springs, which had a 20-inch front leaf section, which moved a 117-inch wheelbase to 116 inches, then the use of shorter Plymouth spring hangers tucked it another inch forward, making the wheelbase 115 inches instead of the factory 117, which fell within the plus-minus of NHRA spec on wheelbase. A Chrysler 8 3/4-inch rear end was packed with 456 gears, and the Superstock Weapon of the Year was complete, all for $4,671 delivered to your local dealer. These things would run 11s before the carburetors were tuned right. Of course, the engine was the real heart of this flyweight bomber. The 426 magnesium cross-ram, dual-carbureted, aluminum-headed, solid-lifter camshaft Hemi was a thing of violent beauty. The camshaft had been more radicalized for 1965. 540 lift, 312 degrees of duration. The thing idled between 13 and 1,500 RPM per factory recommendation. Well listed at 425 horsepower, these engines made 540-plus horsepower all day long, especially when used on Sundays. So, now we know what the boys at Central Islip had ordered when they went to their local Dodge Boys dealership and waited for the car to show up. The next man to enter the story is probably the most important. His name was John Zubel. He was the owner and operator of a local auto body shop that specialized in customizing. The list of jobs that Zubel was tasked with when he saw this 0-mile car that had probably never done a burnout will have dedicated Mopar lovers the world over clutching their chest when they understand what was done to this car. If you don't think you can handle it, you might want to go watch some Dick Landy videos now. Otherwise, your soul may be hurt after we go through this next part. And remember, this car had 0 miles on it. John Zubel's work order read as follows. Chop off roof. Chop 3 feet off back of car. Remove doors and all glass. Shorten the rear springs. Reinforce what was left of chassis. Make wide wheels for slicks. Construct steel tub for hoses, ladder rack, and riding fireman bumper. Zubel, to his credit, did an amazing job building this car, and it was a lot of work. Consider the fact that they had cut the thing totally to pieces. He began by bracing the chassis up by making extra chassis members from 1/8-inch steel plates. These were welded to the factory subframe, or what was remaining of it. He added sheet metal under the cowl and to the floorboards to try to stiffen up what was left. Now, the car had to have been an absolute noodle with the loss of the roof and the back 3 feet, so he then constructed a kind of truck bed that replaced the passenger compartment. He made the entire subframe of 1/8-inch thick steel tubing to support the bed. Under the right side of the bed was mounted a fuel tank, and the battery was, ironically, in the same position Chrysler had it from the factory in the right rear. Now, the guys also added a passenger seat, possibly because of the rules. It would not have had a passenger seat from the factory as an RO51 package car. Ahead of that passenger seat was a fuel-chilling cooler that all the gas passed through on the way to the twin Hawley carburetors. Where previously lived a lightweight factory bumper now held a huge aluminum diamond plate step bumper that was supported by 1-inch square steel tubing. Now, this is where multiple guys stood and rode during the competition, so it needed to be built very, very strong, and clearly Zubel got the message on that. A conversion to NASCAR severe-duty drum brakes was added because really hauling this car down from full-throttle blasts was an integral component to winning competitions, and the more binders the better. The rear leaf springs were shortened or replaced by shorter springs, taking their total length from 37.5 inches to 18 inches. Now obviously the added weight of a truck bed with hundreds of pounds of humans in it and the different needs of this style of competition meant that the superstock springs were probably not the right parts for the job. Lastly, Zubel whipped the boys up a set of wide wheels to fit 9-inch cheater slicks on. He used Buick hoops, and he filled those hoops with custom machined centers that used a Dodge bolt pattern. John Still ran the team. Joe McGurk had the fun job of driving this beast, and the Northport Ramrods Car Club helped to keep the twin-carb Hemi running in tip-top shape. After all, as a rather temperamental, solid lifter cam engine, it needed some attention to stay on top of its game. This beastly creation was used all summer long from the 1965 competition year all the way into the middle 1970s when it was replaced by a more contemporary rig. The best news? The Coronet not only still exists, but is frequently used in parades and public appearances around its native central Islip area. There's something innately great about this mashup of lightweight factory drag machine and intense fire drill team competition. I know it's weird, don't get me wrong, but it's weird in a great way. Even more amazing is the fact that the car wasn't lost to history or neglected to its doom or cut up and thrown away. Yes, superstock lovers may cringe at this one, but let's be real. This thing was put to a tougher task than most drag cars are. Its heft was increased, its chassis was chopped to pieces, and yet a dual-quad 426 Hemi delivered its legendary brand of performance for a decade or more of warm New York summers. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorite freak show stories of all time. These cars regularly sell for deep into the six figures at auction. They only made 202 of them originally, the 101 Dodges and the 101 Plymouths. Of course, over time, many of them have been crashed or raced to death, so the few that remain certainly bring big dollars across the auction block. This car may not bring that type of money, and frankly, I'm happy for it. It'll keep it in historical preservation, it'll keep it as something to admire, and it will keep it as a piece of muscle car history spun out in a way nobody saw coming. I'm Brian Loans. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more muscle car, drag racing, gearhead, and mechanical history. Factory lightweight Hemi fire trucks and all.